talk about today, if a member called in and is stating that they have no power to the console, how do we identify and how do we troubleshoot those to get the proper part sent out to the member or potentially resolve it on the first call resolution, right? That's our ultimate goal. So if a member calls in, they have no power to the console, we can actively see that there's nothing going by pressing the buttons. We can't hear anything. If we look up here, what's a couple things that we can check first?
We should look for any lights on the console.
Okay.
If there's any sound coming from the console itself. If we're going to plug the machine and there's some rattling sound at the back of the console, I think that's some of the things we need to consider.
Okay. I always say the first thing first is like when we turn our machine on, what is the very first thing we do? We have to plug it in.
Plug it in the outlet.
In the outlet. Perfect. So we want to start there. If we plug it into the outlet, first we want the member to verify, is that outlet working? How do we verify if the outlet's working?
We'll have to try a different machine or any device.
Yep, so a different type of device, whether that's a cell phone charger, a lamp, whatever it is, have the member advise them, hey, can you check that outlet for me by plugging in a different device to see if that is getting power. If we verified, yes, that's getting power, we know the outlet's good, now we're moving to the next step. What's the next step once it's plugged in? When we plug it in, what do we check next?
Power to the console.
Before that?
The power switch.
Power switch. So we're gonna check down here, we're gonna make sure that the power switch is set to the reset position and not the off position. I've had plenty of members just miss that step and it's an easy step to fix it, right? So once we have gotten to that step, we always want to make sure the safety key is on. If the safety key is not on, sometimes the console will not light depending on the machine. So super important that we're advising that the machine is plugged in, power switch is on, and the safety key is on the console. Okay, so once we are here, we can still identify that the console is still not receiving power. We want to control the call by advising the member to go ahead and unplug it at this point for their safety and go ahead and remove the motor hood cover. You can typically remove the motor hood cover with 3 screws on the front, 1 on each side, depending on the equipment. So once we've asked the member to remove the motor hood cover, we now can access all of our control boards and the wires. There is some probing questions we would want to ask the member before potentially moving to this step, especially if they call in and they said, I just assembled my machine and my console won't turn on. So what are some things we would check and what are some probing questions we can ask to identify what we need to go to next?
Like if we recently moved the equipment, it could be with the wirings.
Okay, so if they recently moved.
And also if they replaced some of the parts.
Perfect, replaced a part recently.
Or if it's a new machine, if it was assembled recently.
Awesome. So those are the 3 things I always ask my members. Was this recently assembled, moved, or did we replace a part recently? Chances are if they just assembled it not working, we're probably looking at an assembly wire that the member would have connected during the assembly. We can have potentially a pinched wire. So being able to identify those also by looking at your Salesforce account and see what the purchase date was, that's a pretty good indicator where our next steps are. So had we checked and the member says, I just assembled it, it's not turning on, what wires do we check?
If there is no power with the console, then that's most likely with the upright wire.
Upright, okay, depending on the machine, right? We have an upright wire, we have a handrail wire, we have a belly pan wire. There's multiple connections, so being able to pull your user's manual and identify those connection points during the assembly will help us greatly control the call, but also educate the member and have them look for those wires. So over here, you have your handrail wire, and then you have your upright wire. You can see the connection point just right there. That is one of the main connection points we always want to check, as well as where they attach the console. I'm not going to have you do that today, but if we have to, we would look at our user's manual on how to get this console off to look at those wires and check for any pinched, damaged, or wires that are not connected properly all together.
Okay.
Once we have checked the upright wire, the handrail wire, and we've determined those are all good, we would now move to looking down below. Of course, if there was a damaged wire or wire that was pinched or pulled out of that wire harness, we would want to order that part. If we've checked those, everything's good, and we've now moved down to here. Remember, we have two different type of units that we're going to troubleshoot, and depending on those units, there's a big difference on what we look at as far as the control boards and the lights and what they're doing. So we have two different types of units depending on the incline type. Do you know those two types?
DC and AC.
DC and AC. Do you know the biggest difference between those two?
Yeah, for DC unit, we have small motors, and they usually have two controllers.
Okay, close. So yes, they have two additional controllers, right? So the way I look at it is DC3 controllers. You have your drive motor controller, your power supply, and then your incline controller. With the AC unit, you're only going to see the drive motor controller, which is really a lot more simpler to identify what parts needed when you're talking about no power to console. Essentially, if there was just an AC unit and it just had the drive motor controller, so it didn't have any of these other components, we can identify pretty quickly what part is needed, right? So if we were looking at the controller, we were going to think that this is an AC unit, doesn't have these additional ones. What two lights are we going to look for on the motor controller?
They're red and the green light.
Yep, red and green light. So if we know that there's a red and green light on that controller, but the console's not powering on, what parts are we going to look at potentially replacing?
Could be the controller.
Probably not. If there's a light on the controller, you have the green and the red light, we're probably not thinking it's a controller issue because we know it's, hey, it's getting power, it's doing what it's supposed to, it should be sending power up to that console. So we're going to look at the parts between the console and that controller, which would be the wire harness or potentially the console itself. If we know we have power to the drive motor controller on an AC unit, probably wasn't assembled within the last 30 days. There wasn't a part that was replaced. We can't physically see any damaged parts. It's probably a good indicator that it's the console. Perfect. So those are a lot easier to troubleshoot. So when we're talking about a DC unit, they haven't recently assembled, they haven't recently replaced a part or moved the machine, probably not a wire harness as far as the assembly steps, and we're looking more underneath the motor hood controller. So things we can identify, if we're looking at the drive motor controller and we are missing the green light, we probably need to replace the controller. Yep. So we want to indicate that both of those lights are lighting up. That tells us that the power is coming into the machine and going to that controller. If one of those lights is missing, there's probably something defective within the controller. And comparing that to your knowledge articles with this specific machine or any type of DC machine, based off of those symptoms, it will provide us the part to order the drive motor controller. Okay, so super important that we're checking that both those green and red light, which in this indication, both of those are on. Okay, the next step we would look at, if we can say, yep, the power's on that drive motor controller, we have that green light present and we have that red light present. The next step we want to look at is the
Kiwi board.
The incline controller. Yep, very important. You're never going to see on the parts list as a Kiwi board. I love that you use that terminology, but in the knowledge articles and everything else, it's going to be listed as a incline controller. Yep. So the next step we would want to be able to identify is this incline controller getting power? How do we identify if the incline controller is getting power?
There should be a red light over here.
Awesome. Yep, there should be some type of a light on it that indicates, hey, I'm getting power, I'm doing what I need to do. If that was missing and there wasn't any power, what parts would we look at?
Should check the wire first and check the incline controller.
Yep, awesome. So yeah, no, you're perfect. So if this wasn't getting power, we can see there's no light on it. We would look at potentially, we're looking at a wiring issue from the wires from the drive motor controller to the incline controller, or potentially the controller itself and needing to be replaced. So inspecting those wires, having the member, if we're going to inspect wires, we want to always advise the member to
unplug the trigger first.
Or power it off. So go ahead and power it off while we check these wires. Nope, there should be a switch right here. And we want to wait about 30 seconds to make sure the power is completely out of that, so the member does not get shocked by any of the power. It's never fun. Okay, so we've given it time. At this point, we would advise the member to go ahead and inspect those wire connections by tracing them. I always tell them to go ahead and trace them from the incline controller all the way over. Make sure there's no damage, pinch, any type of wire connections in here, making sure that all of those wires are plugged in pretty safety. Nothing's loose, nothing's hanging out. If we can see those, then potentially, depending on your knowledge article, based off the symptoms, you would either order the wires between the drive motor controller or the incline controller.
Okay.
Make sense?
Alright.
Questions?
Yeah. I'm going back to the controller
Okay.
lights. So there's two lights, right? The red light and a green light. What if there's one light missing? Like there's only red light on the controller.
So if you look at your knowledge articles, it's going to say that is the red light or the green light not lit. If one of those is not lit, we're probably looking at that. There's a potential that it may be like the power switch that's not getting the power to the controller all the way, but most likely we're looking at a drive motor controller. If one of those lights is missing, that's a great indicator that something's off, right? It's not doing what it's supposed to, and we would look at that component.
Got it.
Any other questions?
Right, so that also applies to the incline motor controller, right? If there's no lights with the incline controller, then we would have to possibly replace it.
Yep. So if there's no lights on the incline controller, for the instance that there's no power to the console, that's an indicator something's not working. And we can do that by process of elimination, that it's probably the incline controller or potentially the wires that go between the drive motor controller and the incline controller. Yep. And if you guys use your resources by using your knowledge articles, and being able to refer to that based off of the symptoms, here's your resolution, that's going to be your best source. Properly identifying what parts we need to send to the member to get that first call resolution. Awesome. Any other questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, that's it.